morning. We are on Daf Tzadi Zayin Amud Beis 97b. Today's Daf is Tzadi Ches 98, and we're at the Mishnah. The Mishnah is talking about items that would be unique forms of carrying and concern, and specifically holy objects. We talked about tefillin that somebody found and how to bring them back in. And here's that we have somebody who's reading a scroll. Most of the Svarim, most of the holy books that they had at that time were in scroll form, and somebody's reading the scroll. Think of like a Torah scroll, and one side rolls off of whatever he's reading on, whether it's a stand or his lap, and one side rolls off towards the public domain, and he's sitting on an askufa, which is a stoop in front of the house, and the assumption is the stoop is a reshus hayachid, a private domain, being that it's 10 tefachim high and at least 4 by 4, and therefore it's a private domain, and it rolled off towards the public domain, which is off near the house, and the Gemara is going to address that. So Yekarab a Sefer ala Eskufa, he's reading on the stoop, the ledge in front of the house. When it's Galgal Sefer Miyadi, one side of the scroll rolls off. So he still has holding on to one side, but the other side of the scroll rolls off. So Golele Etzle, he can roll it back towards himself. Similarly, Hayakarab Barosh Agag. Similarly, if he's reading on the roof, and again, one side of the scroll rolls off off his hands, and he's still holding on to the second side, but the one side that he's holding, and the other side rolls off and rolls away. Again, here too, he can roll it back. And it rolled away from him. As long as it's not within 10 tefachim of the ground, then he can roll it back towards himself. Once it gets within 10 tefachim of the public domain, he can no longer pull it back. So now he's just going to turn it onto its side, flip it so that the writing is not facing up, but the writing is facing against the wall in order to protect the writing, and that's an honor and respect for the sefer, but he leaves it where it is. He cannot pull it back because it's within 10 tefachim of the public domain, which is the airspace of the public domain. However, Rabbi Yehuda says actually, even if it's only a pin breadth between the wall, between the floor, the ground, which is the public domain, and the sefer, since it never landed, the Gemara is going to explain, never rested on anything, so it's still in the air, and he can pull it back. Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Shimon says even when it's on the ground, he can pull it back to himself. Since he's still holding on to one side, it really is still within his hands and not on the ground in the public domain. So even if the other end is on the ground in the public domain, it's still considered in his hand because he's holding on to one edge. And it's rabbinic that he should not go get it. That's a derabana and a shvus, an account of that it may roll away completely, and even the part that's in his hand may roll away, and then he's going to go and get it and bring it back. And so even when it's entirely, even if one side is still in his hand, he's not allowed to go and get it. So Rabbi Shimon says that would be fine if we're not talking about Sifrei Kodesh, we're not talking about holy books, but over here we're talking about Kisvei HaKodesh, we're talking about holy writings, and therefore the rabbinic enactment of maybe it's going to completely be out of your hand and then you're going to go get it and bring it back, and that's going to be a Torah prohibition. We're not concerned about that when we're dealing with Kisvei HaKodesh. So Gemara says, okay, so what's the case of this ledge that's in front of the house? Ilema is kufer reshus hayachid. is the eskufa itself a Torah level private domain, meaning it's 10 tfachim high, which let's say is 30, 40 inches, 4 tfachim wide, 4 by 4. So that's a private domain. And what's the domain in front of this ledge? Become a Rishus Harabim, and in front of it directly is a public domain, a Torah level public domain. So we're talking about a potential deoraisa, a potential Torah prohibition of carrying something from the street, public domain street, into onto this ledge. In such a case, we're not going to be concerned that it may actually fall out of his hand and he's going to go and get it and bring it back in, and that's going to be a Torah prohibition. And now we go to Tzadik Ches 98. Mani, Rabbi Shimoni. So this must be, whose opinion is this? This is Rabbi Shimon who says that we're not concerned. Since it's a rabbinic enactment, it's a concern that maybe you're going to do a prohibition, a oraisa level carrying. But in and of itself, right now, it's not a concern. You're not actually going to carry it. So, since it's a shvus, anything that's a rabbinic protection, a rabbinic enactment, is not going to stop us from actually bringing back Kisvei HaKodesh, the holy writings. In such a case, the Chachamim would not have enacted their enactment. Ema Seifa. So that would be the explanation of the first case. And then the next case, the middle case, is Rabbi Yehuda. Then Rabbi Yehuda says that even if it's hanging down, as long as it's not touching the ground, even a pin breadth, it's not going to be a problem. You're allowed to bring it back because it never landed in the public domain. So that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, who is concerned with the bringing it back once it hits the ground. And then it says, Rabbi Shimon, and then Rabbi Shimon, it goes back to Rabbi Shimon, who says you cannot bring it back. You can bring it back even if it completely came to rest. The one side that fell completely came to rest in the street. You can pull it back because you're still holding on to one side. So Reish of a Sefer Rabbi Shimon, the first and last point of the Mishnah is going to be Rabbi Shimon. Metzias Rabbi Yehuda, the middle is Rabbi Yehuda. That's not the typical way that the Mishnah would be. Amar Rav Yehuda. So Rav Yehuda explains, indeed, that's the Mishnah in Reish of a Sefer Rabbi Shimon. The first and last part of the Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon. Metzias Rabbi Yehuda, and the middle is going to be Rabbi Yehuda. However, Rabbah says no. We're going to explain the Mishnah differently. Rabba ma'ahacha beskufa nedresas askina. You're right that this may be a private domain, but we're talking about that the path here is in the public right away, and people step on it, and people walk through there. And so if you leave it like that, the not only is the holy sefer hanging there, but it is also likely to be trampled, and that's why you're allowed to be lenient. Because it's such a great disgrace to the sefer, because it's going to be trampled by people walking there. And since it's still someone in his possession, he's still holding on to it, so he can bring it back. And so the first opinion can be, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, not only Rabbi Shimon. And because of the disgrace of the Sifrei Kodesh, the Rabbanan allow you to bring it back. So we ask a question. There's a brisa somewhere that says that as long as, even if it hit the ground, if it didn't roll, right? So he's holding on to one end, the other end hit the ground, but it rolled away only within 4 amos of where he's sitting. So not only did it hit the ground, but it remained within the 4 amos. So the carrying within a public domain is 4 amos. But over here, not only is it still in his possession, which means that it's not going to be a Torah level carrying, but also it's not 4 amos away, so it's not going to be a Torah level of carrying even if the entire thing fell there, because to transgress on a Torah prohibition, it would have to carry 4 amos. Now, here that wouldn't be the case in any case. True in any case, because he's carrying it from a public domain to a private domain. But nevertheless, since it's not 4 amos away, so when he pulls it back while still sitting on the ledge, he's pulling it back. It's still in his possession, and he's pulling it back within 4 amos. Goyle say he's allowed to pull it back. Chutz l'dalet. However, if it rolled farther than 4 amos away, so now that counts as a carrying space within the public domain. There, he can no longer pull it back anymore. He's going to turn it onto its writing, and leave it like that till the end of Shabbos. Now, but if you're right, like you just explained, and we're talking about that it's a skufa, a ledge that people walk over, that the masses from the public domain trample on, well, then these writings are going to be trampled. You have the same concern that you had before. And since it's still only a rabbinic prohibition because he's still holding on to one edge, he should be allowed to pull it back. And this would be true also according to the first opinion. That did not say that it's where they're trampling. It said that it's a Rabbi Shimon. What difference does it make whether it's 4 amos or not? After all, it's still a bezoyin kisvei kodesh. It's a concern of the honor of the kisvei kodesh, of the holy writings, and he's still holding on to it. So it's still rabbinic. Mali toch dalet amos, mali chutz arba amos. What difference does it make whether it's within 4 amos or not? Ela amar Abaye. So rather, Abaye says we're mistaken. This is not talking about that the ledge, the stoop in front of the house, is 10 tefachim high. It's less. It is less than 10 tefachim high, and therefore it doesn't count as a private domain. It's a rabbinic private domain. It's a Carmelis, the in-between space. So you have the house, which is a private domain because it's enclosed. The stoop in front of the house being less than 10 tefachim high is going to be a Carmelis, the in-between space, and the in front of the stoop is a Rishos HaRabim, a public domain. Rishos HaRabim, the public domain is directly in front of it. So Toch Dalet Amos. So within 4 amos that it rolled, one side rolled away, he's still holding on to one side, and the other side rolled away within 4 amos. The enough of because even if it would fall and he would come and bring it, it would not be a Torah prohibition because he'd bring it back onto the ledge, onto the stoop, and that's less than 10 tefachim high, so it's not a private domain. So he would not transgress a Torah prohibition because he's bringing it from a Torah level public domain into an in between a rabbinic space and not a Torah level private domain. So there's no chiyuv chata, so it would not be a Torah prohibition. Shara l'Rabbanan. So therefore the Rabbanan said you can go bring it back. Another roll it back because you're holding on to it. But once it's outside of 4 amos, now the carrying it of 4 amos itself, even though he's bringing it onto a ledge, but within the public domain itself, he's carrying it for 4 amos, and that's going to be a Torah prohibition. Therefore, l'shari l'Rabbanan, the Rabbanan did not allow you to roll the holy writings, the Kisvei Kodesh, back. So Gemara says, "Yihachi tech dalet amos nami nigza dilma ma'ayil rishus harabim rishus hayachid." If you're concerned that even though right now it's not a Torah prohibition, right now you're holding on to one edge, and so therefore it's still considered within your possession, you can roll it back. But we're concerned that since the other edge rolled 4 amos away in the public domain, if you would drop the end you're holding and then go get it, it would be a Torah prohibition. Well, in even if it rolled less than 4 amos, it could be that Torah prohibition, because if you drop the end you're still holding on to, and the entire sefer is now out in the public domain, when you bring it back, you may not end on the ledge. You may go back into the house itself, and that too would be a Torah prohibition. You're walking from the private, you carried and picked it up from a public domain and into the house, into the private domain. Maybe he's going to bring it all the way into the house. But if you tell me, well, no, but he's going to have to do so by walking onto the stoop, and there's an in between and in between the public domain, and he walks onto a stoop which is not a public domain and also not a private domain, it's the Carmelis, and then he walks into the house, and so therefore that counts as a barrier, a break between the public domain and private domain. Well, we have a statement of Rava. We know that if somebody carries an item he picks it up in a public domain, and he carries it above his head, which is above 10 tefachim, and we know the public Rishus HaRabim, the public space, only is only up to 10 tefachim. So the item that he's carrying is above the airspace of the public domain. But yet, since he picked it up and carried it 4 amos and put it down, or he stopped walking, which counts as putting it down, that's going to be the halachic equivalent of it being carried, but in between, it's in the airspace of an exempt area. And nevertheless, it counts as having transgressed, because he picked it up and he put it down and he carried it 4 amos, even though that in between it was in an exempt space. And the reason is because it never landed in the exempt space. He never put it down there. So too over here, if he were to pick it up in the public domain, meaning if the Sefer Torah completely fell out of his hand, even the end that he's holding on to, and he went and picked it up in the public domain and carried it all the way into the house, walking through the stoop, but never stopping on the stoop, so he never put it down on the stoop, that's not going to break the transgression, and it counts as if he picked it up in the public domain, carried it into private domain directly, and put it down. So he's going to be chayiv. So too over here, it should be a problem. And why are you not concerned about that? So the Gemara says, well, the ledge is actually a large ledge. Think of maybe a deck or a balcony in front of along apartment buildings and so on. So even though that it is less than 10 tefachim high from the ground, it is a long space, and so there's no concern that he's going to walk directly into the house, because there's enough space on the ledge that we can assume, on this stoop, that we can assume he's going to stop there, and once he stops, even for a moment, to rest, that's going to count as having put the item down, and it will no longer be a Torah prohibition of taking from the public domain to private domain directly. And so even though there is a possibility that he would transgress, but since he's still holding on, so right now it's not a Torah prohibition to bring it back. And even if it dropped, it's not likely to come to a Torah prohibition. That's why there's no concern, and he's allowed to bring it back. However, if it rolled more than 4 amos, so here, if he were to drop the part that's still in his house, in his hand, then he would actually go and pick something up 4 amos away and bring it back, and that's going to be a Torah prohibition of carrying 4 amos in a public domain. There, the Chachamim were strict and said you have to leave it where it is. Because once he's walking on this long ledge, he's going to remember that he can't walk directly into the house, and he's going to stop. The other explanation is maybe that we're talking about the ledge is not so long. However, people read the Sifrei Kodesh, so he was on the ledge reading it to begin with. So we assume that he's going to come back to the ledge, even if it's a small ledge. He's not going to go into the house. He's actually going to read from it, and then only does he put it down. And so he's going to stop on the stoop, on the in between space, and we're not concerned he's going to bring it directly into the house. But if it's 4 amos, we're concerned that he's going to carry in the public domain. So it says, maybe he's going to continue reading in the public domain, and then when he's done, walk directly into the house. So it says, Ben Azai holds that even while you're walking, it counts as if you stopped. And since you walk through the Carmelis, the in-between space, before walking into the house, it doesn't count like you went directly in. And this is the teaching base of Ben Azai in regards to the sides of the public domain, if they count as non-halachic, non-Torah level public domain, that you cannot transgress by bringing it from the private domain into the public domain or vice versa. This is the Tzidei Rishus Harabim, the sides of the public domain, which the Gemara in Shabbos talks about. This was a place, the Stava was called, it was where the people held their wares, and that was not an easy travel because to walk through, because people had their wares out, and so you had the public domain and you had the side, the Tzidei Rishus Harabim, the Stav, where everybody had their stands and wares, and the market was selling, and people would stop and stand around, and so it wasn't easy to walk there. So it didn't count as Rishus Harabim. It counted as a Carmelis, and anybody carrying from the public domain through there, even if they continuously walk, Ben Azai said, every step you took is as if you've put the item down in that place and uprooted it again, and so you never had a Torah prohibition of carrying from the public domain to the private domain directly, unless it was direct without any space between. So to over here with the stoop, since you're holding on to one hand, at one edge of the sefer when it rolled away, and even if it were completely to fall out of your hand, when you bring it back, there's going to be a stop on the stoop, so there's no concern. However, if it rolled 4 amos away, we're afraid that he's going to take one long step, one giant step, jump back, and that's going to be carrying it back is going to be a full Torah prohibition of carrying 4 amos and Rishus Harabim. So Gemara says, maybe he's going to throw it into the house. Because Ben Azai agrees that if you threw it, that would count as a complete transgression from the public domain to a private domain, even though it flew through the air of the in-between space. Now we know that you do not throw holy writings. You wouldn't throw a Sefer Torah, a Tehillim, etc. And so you're not going to take a Sefer Kodesh, a holy book, and a scroll and throw it into the house. He's going to carry it in, and therefore there's no concern that of transgression from a public domain to a private domain, because the stoop in between is in between space, and he would have considered, even if he walks directly through, according to Ben Azai, it counts as if he stopped and put it down on the stoop. The Mishnah had said that if he was reading on a roof and the writings rolled down so far that it came to within 10 tefachim of the ground, or according to Yehuda, touched the ground, he can no longer schlep it back up, even though he's holding onto one edge. Since the other side of the scroll rolled down, he cannot pull it back up, but it's not respectful for the sefer to leave it like that, so he's going to turn it onto its writing, as writing facing down. So Mishari, are you allowed to do that? Is that respectful to have the writing down towards the towards the ground or the table? Vatani, we learned Sfarim Tefillim is those scribes, Sofrim, that are writing, whether they're writing holy books, Sfarim, Tefillin, Mezuzahs. If when he walks out in the middle, he's not allowed to turn the writing onto its face so that it be protected. But rather he must cover it with something. And so you see that it's disrespectful to turn a sefer onto its face. Where it says Hasam Efsher, there you have what to do. You're able to do that by covering it. But over here, you can't cover it because you can't carry anything out to cover it, because just as you're not allowed to bring the sefer back, you're not allowed to carry it. And also, you may not have anything. It's not so practical. The Eloi Apich, and if he doesn't turn it over, he just leaves it open, so then he's leaving the writings open like that. That's also disrespectful. So in this scenario, the best that he can do within this case is to turn it over, because otherwise it'd be otherwise it would be even more disrespectful. So Gemara says that he cannot pull in the Mishnah. when it rested on, when he was reading on the roof and some of it fell, it hadn't rested anywhere. So if it didn't rest, why can't he pull it back? After all, it never came to a rest, and so he can't. So he's not pulling it from a public domain. It never rests. He's not. It's the three steps are akira, uprooting something or picking something up from where it is currently, its current space, carrying it over 4 amos or through across a property line, across private to public, and vice versa, and then putting it down where it is. And in this case, it's actually dangling in the air. It's not, even though that it may be dangling in the public domain, but it never came to a rest. So Rava says that we're talking about a slanted wall, that it actually is resting on the wall itself. So what do you say the Mishnah is talking about? That the wall is a slanted wall, and since it's a slanted wall, it counts as if it did come to a rest on the wall. Ema Seifa. So how are you going to explain the next part of the Mishnah? Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you can pull it back because it never came to a rest, because as long as it's even a pin breadth between the end of the sefer the one end that fell, you're holding on to one end, and the other end that rolled away is not completely on the ground. It's a pin breadth off. You can pull it back. But if you're saying that it's on a slanted wall, then it did come to a rest because it's resting on this slanted wall. So Gemara says, here's what it means. The Mishnah is missing, and what Rabbi Yehuda is responding to is another case. First case is that it rested on a slanted wall. That's why he can't pull it back. But if it's not a slanted wall, and we're now on base 98b. But if it's on a wall that's not slanted, if it's above 3 tefachim from the ground, so it never came to a rest on the ground because it's not lavud, is the within 3 tefachim counts as if it's on the ground already, and here it's above 3 tefachim, so you can pull it back. But if it's below 3, then he has to turn it. To which Rabbi Yehuda responds and says, Rabbi Yehuda Emer, even if it's not off the ground, only a pin breadth, you can pull it back because he says it actually has to properly land, and the be'inan anacha gabi mashu, it has to actually rest on something, and it didn't. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, what about what Rava said? Within 3 tefachim of the ground requires hanacha. So let's say Rava is really stating his halacha that even within 3 tefachim of the ground that actually has to come to a rest on something, is a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim in our Mishnah. Ella kulu Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara says, you're right. That wouldn't make sense that Rava would say a statement that actually is a machlokes in the Mishnah. So therefore, we're going to say our Mishnah is all the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and there's more information missing. And this is what the Mishnah means to say. It's on a slanted wall, so then it counts as if it landed. But if it's not on a slanted wall, it's just dangling off the roof. Even if it's within 3 tefachim of the ground, you couldn't pull it close to you. Rabbi Yehuda Emer, because Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion, even if it's only a thread's breadth between between the ground and the sefer, you can pull it back because it never came to rest. My timer, because it has to rest on something, and it never rested on anything. And so the first opinion, essentially, the Mishnah is saying it depends. If it came to rest on the wall, in other words, the wall is protruding enough or on an angle enough that when it's dangling, he's holding onto one side and the other side is dangling along the wall. It's actually resting on the wall, so that's going to count as it came to a rest. And therefore, he cannot pull it back if it's within 10 tefachim of the ground because it came to rest in a public domain, even though he's holding on to one side. Rabbinically, he cannot pull it back. With the Rabbanan, he can't pull it back because maybe he's going to lose control of the one side of the scroll that he's holding on to, and then he's going to come to bring back a Torah prohibition, which would be a Torah prohibition. However, if it's not on an angled wall or a protruding wall, and it's just dangling in the air, then he can pull it back as long as he's holding on to one side and the other side hasn't actually rested on the ground in the public domain. He can bring it back because it never had a hanacha, a rest on a specific space. So you're not doing the first fundamental part of carrying, which is uprooting something from the space that it's on. And this is actually dangling in the air and not resting on anything. So you're not going to transgress the Torah prohibition anyhow, so you can schlep it back.
If it's on a slanted wall, so I'm assuming that he's standing. If he's sitting on the roof, he's in the Rishus HaYachid. Is that correct?
Correct.
The wall. Here's what my question is: the wall. What's the status of the wall, the outside wall? I mean, the inside wall is Rishus HaYachid. So what's the problem? The outside of the wall, isn't that Rishus HaYachid as well?
No, if it's within 10 tefachim of the ground, so that's going to be the airspace of the Rishus HaRabin. No less than Choyrei Rishus HaRabin. Holes in the wall that are accessible to the public domain. This is actually an accessible space to the public domain, and it's within the 10 tefachim of the ground, which is the airspace of the public domain. It would count as a Rishus HaRabin.
So the exterior of my house is a Rishus HaRabin?
If it is in a Rishus HaRabin, the airspace. We saw this similarly at the beginning of Shabbos and at the beginning of the Masechta. If somebody takes an item and he throws it and it sticks to the wall, right?
Right.
So it landed on the wall, and the wall is going to be Rishus HaRabin.
But there he threw Derech Rishus HaRabin.
Right. Here too, the exterior wall being in a Rishus HaRabin is Rishus HaRabin.
Okay.
And this is talking about that it's within 10 tefachim of this ground, which is the airspace and the space of Rishus HaRabin. Yeah. Okay. The next Mishnah is going to talk about if somebody has a ledge in front of their window from their private house, which is a private domain, and the ledge is over the public domain. And so can I put something on the ledge, or am I concerned that it may fall off the ledge into the public domain and I may walk out and go and get it and bring it back in, and that's going to be carrying from a public domain to a private domain, and there should be the same concern that it may fall out. So that's the question. You have a ledge in front of a window over a public domain. Is there a concern that you can put something that you shouldn't put stuff there because it may fall or not? Ziz shalofnei chalon, a ledge or really a protrusion from the wall. That's a shelf, let's call it, 10 tefachim off the ground, and it's 4x4. So it essentially is like a private domain. You can take things from your house and put it on there, and vice versa. And we're not concerned that it'll fall because it's all private domain up on the ledge and private domain in your house. So you can take from private domain to private domain. So Gemara says, "Hi ziz the mapik lehecha." What's the space that it's protruding into? Elaim in the mapik l'shus harabim, is it hanging out into a public domain? So why are you not concerned? Lechesh dilman nafil va'asi. Maybe the item that you put on the ledge will fall off, and you're going to go and get it. V'asi la'asuye, and you're going to go and get it and bring it back in. Ela the mapik l'shus hayachid. So what are you going to tell me? That it's over a private domain? Pshita, of course. So if it's private domain, so what's the concern? Even if you went to get it, it's going from private domain to private domain. So Abai says it is over public domain, and nevertheless, and what are you putting on there? You're putting your dishes, your glass, where if it falls, then it's going to break. So we're not really concerned that you're going to go and get it, and you're going to be careful to make sure it doesn't fall because it'll break if it falls. And so we're not so concerned. But if you had something that if it fell, big deal, you're going to go and get it. So you're not going to be careful. And if it did fall, you're going to go and get it. And so that you may not put on the ledge. And indeed, we have a brisa like that. Tanya Namahachi. We have a brisa that says ziz shelafnei achalon, a shelf in front of the window, even though that it protrudes out into a public domain. You can put plates and cups and ketunios, another type of jug or cup, and sluchios and jugs. And you can do so. No matter how low this ledge is, as long as it's not within the 10 tefachim of the ground. So according to Rashi, this usage of the wall is also talking about a ledge that's lower, as long as it's within 10 tefachim. So you can use a ledge directly in front of the window or a ledge off to the side, as long as it's above 10 tefachim. But a ledge that's within 10 tefachim, you may not. And Tosfos says that it's talking about the holes in the wall itself, that you could, if there are holes in the wall, you can use from the house, put it into the holes that are above 10 tefachim, but below 10 tefachim, like we were just talking about, are going to be, the holes in the wall do count as public domain since it's within the airspace at 10 tefachim, and you cannot use those. If there's a lower ledge and an upper ledge, he can use the lower ledge. And the upper one, he can only use what's directly in front of the window, but not to the sides that are against the wall. So let's say the window is 2 feet wide, and the shelf in front of the window is 3 feet wide, a half a foot wider on each side of the window. He can use the 2 feet directly in front of the window, but not the half a foot on each side that's against the wall and not against the window. So the Gemara is going to ask, what's the scenario for this? What's the scenario? Is it less than 4 tefachim deep? So therefore, it doesn't count as a private domain. It counts as a exempt space, a makam patur, because it doesn't have enough of a landing space. It's not 4x4. Makam patur, so it's an exempt space. I feel and so he shouldn't be allowed to use even the space directly in front of the window because he may end up passing it to someone in the public domain that way, or it may fall and he's going to go and get it. And if it does have 4, so it's a private domain, you should be able to use not only what's in front of the window but also against the wall. Abai explains. The lower ledge is wider and has 4x4. The elyon less be'arba, and the lower one and the upper one does not have 4. However, the window sill is going to complete the space of that window of the shelf in front of the window to make it into 4. In other words, let's say the window sill itself is 1 tefach, and the shelf in front of it is 3 tefachim deep, and it's wider than the window. So keneged achalon, again, directly in front of the window, where there you have a full 4 tefachim combined between the shelf and the window sill. Mishtamish, then he's allowed to use it. The chorech aleinu, because it's just like a hole in the wall from the private domain, and acts as servicing the private domain, because you have the windowsill, which is private domain, and this is just an extension of that. However, the 2 sides of the window that are not directly of the shelf, that are not directly in front of the window, but rather they are in front of the wall on either side of they're on either side of the window, and therefore they don't have the combination of the windowsill and the shelf to count to 4 tefachim, or rather they only have the 3 tefachim depth, which makes them an exempt space. And even though that normally we say you you're allowed to use an exempt space from a private space and put something there. That's only if it's not going to fall into public domain. You're going to come to get it. Over here, you may end up having it fall, and you're going to go to get it, and therefore there's going to be it's as if you're going to go and get it, and it's as if you're putting it into the public domain directly because it's likely to fall, and so you're not allowed to put it on that ledge unless you have enough space that the sill and the ledge combine to 4 tefachim, so it's a private domain. But the two sides that are off to the side of the window, they don't have the window sill to combine to 4 tefachim. They remain a 3 tefachim ledge, and you're not allowed to use it. The next Mishnah, we'll just start the next Mishnah, is going to deal with carrying, where you carry from a private domain, and you're remaining where you are, but you're doing something that ends up going out into public domain. So, a person can stand in a private domain. So he's standing, let's say, in his house, and leans out the window, and sticks his hand out the window, and carries something in the public domain across the public domain. Never brings it back in. So, metaltel adam, metaltel b'reshus harabim, he can carry within the public domain. So he's sticking his hand out into public domain and move something in the public domain, but never brought it back. Similarly, he can be standing in the public domain and lean into the house, let's say, right, and stick his hand in to unlatch the door. So he's looking for the key, and he takes it off of the hook and puts it into the door, and that's the way he opens the door, by sticking his hand into the private domain. But he's standing in the public domain. As long as it doesn't take it out of its 4 amos of where it is, from where the item is, whether in the public domain or private domain. In this way, he for sure is not transgressing. Similarly, a person should not stand in a private domain. So he's walking in the public domain and needs traveling, and he needs to urinate. So he's going to go off to a ledge, or off to the side, and he's on the ledge. The ledge is 10 tefachim high, and 4 tefachim wide. It's going to be a private domain. And when he urinates, he's urinating into a public space. So that's going to count as carrying from a private domain to public domain. Or vice versa as well. Shouldn't spit. He's standing in the public domain and he spits into a private domain, or vice versa. And the last part of the mission is, Rabbi Yehuda says, once he has phlegm in his mouth and he's collected spit that he needs to spit, he should no longer walk, because if he does, he's carrying in his mouth that spit